I knew the HOA was unhinged, but I didn't think they'd actually unleash a bear on my property. It started with a chicken coop. I'm Hank Nolan, ex-wildlife warden turned rancher. Bought a spread on the edge of a gated rural luxury community in northern Colorado. I've got 10 acres, a few goats, some chickens, and one stubborn donkey named Rusty. Simple life, quiet. At least it was until Tamara Jennings showed up in my driveway in her golf cart like she owned the place. Tamara, president of the Oak Valley HOA, is the kind of middle-aged woman who wears a visor even when it's cloudy and carries a clipboard like it's a badge. She's got that voice shrill, nasal, and always 2 decibels too loud. "You can't have livestock here, mister." "Nolan," she barked, stepping out of the cart like she was the sheriff of the county. I leaned on the fence, sipped my coffee. "It's zoned agricultural. I checked the county records before I bought it. We have HOA regulations. County trumps HOA, you should know that." Her jaw twitched. "We'll see about that." Over the next few weeks, I got fined for everything. The color of my barn too red, my rooster crowing before sunrise, nature, imagine that, and a goat that allegedly looked aggressive. She even claimed my mailbox leaned too far left. I ignored the fines, replied with legal citations, and kept tending my land. Then things got real weird. Fence wire started disappearing. My trail cams caught a man in a black hoodie cutting through the pasture in the middle of the night. I turned the footage over to the sheriff, but they said it wasn't enough to press charges. 2 days later, I woke up to screaming. Rusty was going ballistic. The goats were huddled in the corner of the pen. I grabbed my rifle and ran outside wearing nothing but boots and boxers. There it was. A full-grown black bear sniffing around the coop, pacing like it knew where to go. I fired a warning shot. It didn't flinch. I fired again, this time into the dirt near its paws. That got its attention. It bolted into the woods. I called wildlife services. They showed up, tranquilized the bear, and tagged it. Said it was odd it had a torn collar around its neck. Not a GPS one, just a leather strap like someone had been keeping it, feeding it, training it. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found a handwritten notice of termination of tenancy nailed to my gate. Like I was renting. Like they could just evict me. Tamara was parked across the street, sipping iced tea from a mason jar and watching me with a smile that made my blood run cold. I walked right over. "You send that bear." She didn't even look surprised. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, showed her the bear footage, zoomed in on the torn collar. "Interesting," she said, tapping her nails on her glass. "But how do you know it wasn't just nature?" I stared at her. "Because I worked wildlife control for 15 years. That bear didn't wander in. It was released." Her smile faltered for just a second, then she turned back to her golf cart. "You're not a good fit for Oak Valley, Mr. Nolan. One way or another, you'll be gone." I watched her drive off, heart hammering. I knew then this wasn't petty anymore. This was war, and I don't lose wars. 3 days later, I got the footage I needed. I'd upgraded my trail cam's motion activated, infrared, and mounted high in the cottonwoods where nobody would think to look. They blended in with the bark so well I doubted even a tracker could spot them. I angled one toward the service road that cut through the woods behind my property, the one the HOA conveniently never mentioned in their glossy brochures. It wasn't on any public map, but I'd seen tire tracks there deep, fresh, and too wide for any standard pickup. That night, around 2 in the morning, the camera caught a box truck easing down the path with its lights off. The driver stepped out wearing a reflective vest and gloves. Couldn't see much of his face, but the logo on the truck door was clear. Northern Valley Wildlife Solutions. I'd never heard of them. I ran a search the next morning. No license, no state permits, no business registration. Total ghost. I took the footage straight to Deputy Laramie at the county sheriff's office. He was the kind of guy who usually handled loose cattle and teenage bonfire parties, but even he raised an eyebrow when I showed him the bear footage followed by the truck. "Looks like someone's running rogue," he said, rewinding the clip. That's no state-contracted outfit. You think it's connected to this HOA mess? I'm certain, I said. That bear didn't just stumble onto my land. It was dumped. He leaned back in his chair, chewing on the cap of his pen. That's felony-level wildlife endangerment. Could be conspiracy if more than one person was involved. Start with Tamara Jennings. We'll need more than suspicion, I nodded. Give me a week. I didn't take that week off. I took it personally. I drove to every animal control facility and wildlife contractor within 50 miles. On the third day, just outside Fort Collins, I found an old colleague of mine, Reggie Dale, working at a rehab center for injured predators. He remembered me from the Yellowstone relocation program years back. You ever hear of Northern Valley Wildlife Solutions? I asked. He squinted. Yeah, they used to be legit. Went under 5 years ago after a bad transport, lost a lynx in downtown Boulder. Owner got sued into the dirt. I showed him the footage of the truck. He frowned. That's one of their old fleet. I recognize the rust on the side panel. Someone's using the name without a license. He nodded slowly. That's not just illegal, that's dangerous. I got back home that night to find my barn door wide open, tools scattered, feed sacks torn, my generator gone. Rusty stood in the middle of the chaos, ears twitching. He was unharmed, but the chickens were rattled and one of the goats had a limp. I called Laramie again. This time he brought backup. They dusted for prints, photographed the tire tracks, and flagged the security footage from my front gate. One of the officers recognized the license plate on a black SUV that had passed by an hour earlier. Belongs to a Gregory Leland, the deputy said. Local contractor, used to be on the HOA board. I didn't say anything. I just handed over the footage I'd saved from the Cottonwood cams this time. A clearer shot of the driver unloading a tranquilized bear from a crate. The sheriff's office brought in fish and wildlife. That's when things escalated. Turns out, the bear had been tagged before 2 years ago near Steamboat Springs. It had been relocated after raiding cabins, but never showed signs of aggression. The tranquilizer used wasn't standard issue either. It was a veterinary sedative not sold to the public. Fish and Wildlife traced the sedative batch back to a private clinic, one that serviced exotic animals. Owned by Dr. Wendy Kroll, Tamara's sister-in-law, by the end of the week, a warrant was issued. They raided the HOA office, technically a converted clubhouse next to the tennis courts, and found a file cabinet full of handwritten notes, maps of member properties, and a spreadsheet titled High-Risk Lots. Mine was at the top. Next to it, Phase 3 Expansion. I stared at the document as the officers flipped through the rest. Looks like they were planning to force certain owners out to repurpose their land, the lead investigator said. Sell it back to developers under the table. I didn't say anything. I just watched as Tamara was led out in cuffs the next morning, her visor gone, her face pale. She didn't say a word to me, but Gregory Leland did. As they loaded him into the cruiser, he turned and muttered, "You think you won. You just slowed it down." The state didn't see it that way. Charges were filed within 72 hours. Conspiracy to commit wildlife endangerment, unlawful transport of a regulated species, breaking and entering, grand theft, and attempted coercion of a private citizen. Dr. Kroll got hit with illegal distribution of veterinary sedatives and falsifying prescription records. The Bear Scheme, as the local paper dubbed it, made national news within days. A rural HOA unleashing wildlife to force residents off their land. It was too insane not to catch fire. But the real blow came when the district attorney added the racketeering charges. Turns out, this wasn't the first time the HOA had targeted landowners. 2 prior residents had sold under pressure after accidental fires and unexplained animal attacks. Nobody had connected the dots until now. A grand jury was called. I testified for 6 hours. The courtroom was packed with reporters and residents' real neighbors, not the clipboard crowd. Tamara sat at the defense table, pale and silent, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they regretted every life choice that led them there. I laid it all out. The footage, the animal tag records, the fake wildlife company, the sedatives, the spreadsheet, the threats, the theft. When I finished, the room was dead quiet. Then the prosecutor stood up and said, "Mr. Nolan, what made you keep going?" I looked straight at Tamara. "Because I don't scare easy, and I sure as hell don't run from people who think rules are optional." The jury took less than a day, guilty on all counts. Tamara and Gregory both got 25 years minimum. No parole for the first 12, Dr. Kroll took a plea deal, 5 years and permanent loss of her license. The HOA was dissolved by court order, all assets liquidated. The Phase 3 development plan dead in the water. A month after the trial, the county posted a new sign on the road into Oak Valley: "No HOA, no trespassing. No exceptions." I had it framed and hung in the barn. Rusty still patrols the fence line like a 4-legged sentinel. The goats are fine. The chickens lay like clockwork. Peace doesn't come easy in these parts, but when it does, it's earned, and if another clipboard warrior rolls up my drive. I've got cameras, records, and one hell of a reputation. The first real rain of the spring came down hard the morning after the sentencing. I was in the middle of repairing the north fence line, boots sinking into the red clay, when a county vehicle pulled into the edge of my drive. A tall man in a tailored gray suit stepped out, holding a leather folio. His shoes were impractical, his expression not. He crossed the soaked ground without hesitation. "You must be Hank Nolan," he said, flipping open his folio. "Assistant U.S. Attorney Malcolm Reddick." I didn't offer my hand, just leaned on the fence post and nodded. "That's supposed to impress me." "Not especially," he said. "But I've been assigned to a federal task force investigating municipal corruption and wildlife trafficking. And Oak Valley just rang every bell we've got." I wiped the rain from my brow. "Didn't think the feds cared about HOA fraud." "They don't," he said, "unless it involves money laundering, interstate sedative transport, and falsified land deeds." That got my attention. He flipped a page and held it out. It was a scanned copy of a warranty deed, my property. Except the buyer's signature wasn't mine. It was forged and dated 2 months before I ever made an offer. "They tried to sell your land to a shell company registered in Delaware. The paperwork was never filed, but they were preparing to claim you defaulted on HOA obligations and vacated. Once you were gone, they'd have filed this. Tamara and Gregory, they weren't operating alone. That spreadsheet you uncovered. It had initials and notations that matched records from 3 other communities in the region, all managed by the same subsidiary." I stared at him. "How deep does this go?" "We're digging." Later that week, a federal grand jury convened in Denver. I wasn't called to testify this time. I'd already handed over everything I had, but I got updates. Reddick was relentless. He tied the forged deed to a local notary who'd been bribed. Found wire transfers from Tamara's accounts to a lobbying firm in D.C. that had been quietly pushing legislation to give HOAs more jurisdiction over agricultural zones. He even traced the sedatives back to a pharmaceutical supplier in Texas, flagged for selling restricted substances through shell clinics. The scope of it was staggering. 6 HOA presidents from 5 counties, 2 developers, 1 state senator's aide who'd been accepting consulting fees. The bear? That was just the beginning. A pressure tactic. Turns out in another case they'd used fire. In yet another, a pack of malnourished feral dogs had been dumped near a property line. All of it meant to spook, drive down value, and trigger a forced sale. The task force had a name for it now: Operation Hollow Fence. By early summer, Tamara was indicted again, this time federally, for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, unlawful wildlife trafficking, and attempted land seizure under false pretenses. Gregory was hit with obstruction and tampering with evidence. Dr. Kroll was cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence, though Reddick told me they were still verifying how much she actually knew. I thought that might be the end of it. It wasn't. One afternoon in June, I got a knock at my door. It was a woman in her late 60s, silver-gray hair in a tight braid, wearing a faded denim jacket with patches from the Colorado Farm Bureau. She introduced herself as Lorna Pike. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were hard. "My sister lived in Oak Valley," she said. "Name was Delilah. Sold her place 3 years ago after her dog was poisoned. I let her in, poured us coffee, she didn't touch it. She'd raised chickens for years. Said Tamara told her they were a health hazard, then the dog got sick. Vet said antifreeze. Delilah was never the same after that. Sold the house for half what it was worth. Moved in with me. She died last fall. I didn't interrupt. She kept a diary, started writing things down, names, dates. Complaints filed, then lost. I didn't think much of it until I saw your story on the news." She pulled out a leather-bound notebook and handed it to me. It was full of neat, looping script, page after page of documented harassment. At the bottom of one page was a line underlined twice. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't my decision." I contacted Reddick immediately. Within a week, they exhumed Delilah's body. Toxicology confirmed traces of ethylene glycol, the same compound found in antifreeze. The charge was upgraded. Second-degree murder by reckless endangerment tied to a broader conspiracy. It was the final nail in the coffin. In court, Tamara didn't look like the woman who used to glide around in a golf cart issuing threats. She looked hollow. Her once perfect hair was limp. Her eyes darted every time someone raised their voice. The courtroom was packed again. This time I sat in the front row next to Lorna. When the verdict came down guilty on all counts, there wasn't a sound. The judge didn't mince words. "Your actions were not only deceitful, they were predatory. You weaponized fear, manipulated systems, and endangered lives for profit." Tamara was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Gregory got 35 years. The notary 10, the state senator's aide, still under investigation. As for the Oak Valley land, it was placed into a trust overseen by the county. The remaining residents voted unanimously to dissolve what little remained of the HOA. Lorna and I started a small cooperative of local landowners, no dues, no fines, just neighbors helping neighbors. The bear, by the way, was relocated again to a protected sanctuary. Turns out he'd been abused, kept in a cage, fed sporadically, likely drugged before being released. He's healing now, far from people. Sometimes, late at night, I walk the fence line with Rusty trailing behind and think about how close I came to losing everything. Not just the land, but the peace that comes with it. The silence that means safety. The freedom that means nobody's watching your every move with a clipboard in hand. I didn't set out to be anyone's hero. I just wanted to be left alone. But when the line gets crossed, when people use power like a weapon, sometimes the only choice is to fight back. And if they come again, I won't just be ready, I'll be waiting. 4 months after the final sentencing, I got a letter in the mail from the Office of the Inspector General. It wasn't a form letter and it wasn't a thank you. It was a request. They wanted my help, not advice, not testimony. Assistance. The fallout from the Oak Valley case had opened a floodgate. A dozen similar HOA-run developments across 3 states were suddenly under scrutiny. The methods varied, but the pattern was familiar coordinated pressure campaigns, fraudulent paperwork, intimidation tactics, and in 2 cases, deliberate animal endangerment. They'd never seen it on this scale. I wasn't keen on getting dragged back in. I had fencing to fix, a new water system to install, and a pair of twin lambs born early that spring who still needed bottle feeding. But something about that letter stuck with me. Maybe it was the way the agent had signed it by hand at the bottom. Maybe it was that I couldn't shake off how close they'd come to stealing not just my land, but my life. So I drove down to Denver. The meeting took place in a federal office building with no signage on the door and reinforced glass in the windows. Inside, I found a small team, 2 DOJ attorneys, a forensic accountant, and a man introduced only as Field Liaison Garza. They'd been tasked with reviewing every HOA operating within a certain radius of critical wildlife corridors. Garza gestured to a corkboard behind him, covered in photos and pins. These developments are creeping into protected buffer zones, and we've got reports that when owners resist, things get unconventional. The map was covered in red flags. I leaned in. You think they're trying to push ranchers and landowners off federally protected land so they can expand into it illegally? The forensic accountant tapped a tablet. We've tracked over 30 million in shadow investments into shell companies over the last 18 months. All funneled through real estate trusts with ties to these HOAs. Garza crossed his arms. What we need is someone who knows how these people operate on the ground, someone who can tell the difference between a nuisance and a threat before it's too late. I didn't agree to anything right then. But I took a printout of that map home and pinned it to the barn wall. A week later, a truck pulled up to my gate. Not a commercial one this time, just a beat-up F-150 with a cracked windshield and plates from Kansas. A man stepped out, mid-40s, with a limp and a tan that said he didn't spend much time indoors. Name was Carl Denning. Said he ran a small horse training outfit in a place called Sutter Ridge about 2 hours south of me. He'd heard about the Oak Valley case. Now he was seeing the same signs in his neighborhood's silent construction, sudden rule changes, and a letter warning him that his horses were non-compliant livestock. "We've been there 20 years, he said, voice tight. "Now they want us gone because some developer wants to drop in luxury cabins." I walked him out to the pasture. Let him meet Rusty, who didn't warm up to strangers unless I gave the go-ahead. He passed the test. "You got cameras?" I asked. "I do now. You document everything? Every nail they say is out of code." I nodded once. "Then let's get to work." Over the next 6 weeks, I worked with Carl and 3 other landowners from different counties. They weren't fighters by nature. One was a widow running a greenhouse. Another was a retired mechanic raising alpacas, but they knew what was at stake. I taught them how to document, how to file counterclaims, how to spot the legal traps buried in the paperwork. Each of them had been served with some version of a voluntary relocation agreement. Sounded polite, but it was backed by threats, inflated liens, code violations, and in one case, a Child Protective Services report that turned out to be completely fabricated. Garza's team built the case as we fed them evidence. It was slow work. Paper trails buried under months of red tape, fake contractors, and misfiled permits. But then we hit something big. One of the HOA board members in Sutter Ridge had a brother on the county zoning commission. We found emails dozens where he'd approved variances for new construction in conservation zones in exchange for campaign donations routed through third parties. That's when the FBI stepped in. They launched a joint operation with the Department of the Interior. Quiet at first, just unmarked vans, sealed warrants and subpoenas, but it didn't stay quiet for long. 3 board members were arrested in one morning. The zoning commissioner was picked up leaving a fundraising dinner. They got him for bribery, racketeering, and knowingly permitting illegal land use. That triggered a domino effect. Documents seized from his office linked him to the same trust that had tried to forge the deed to my land. Turns out, Oak Valley wasn't just an isolated scheme. It was the prototype. They'd been testing methods: coercion, environmental manipulation, even weaponized wildlife before rolling it out on a larger scale. They'd gotten bold because no one pushed back. But now someone had. The DOJ filed a federal civil suit against the parent real estate trust. Assets were frozen. Accounts seized. The trust folded in under 2 weeks. Over a dozen properties across 3 states were placed under federal oversight pending new zoning hearings. At a press conference, the Attorney General called it one of the most sophisticated land fraud operations in recent history. I didn't attend. I was fixing a busted water line and trying to keep one of the lambs from chewing through the wiring in the barn. But the letters started coming in anyway: thank yous, requests for help. Newspaper clippings from towns I'd never been to. Turns out, word gets around when you take down a criminal syndicate with a trail cam and a stubborn donkey. Garza showed up again before the first snow. This time, he didn't bring a folio, just a small box sealed with evidence tape. Inside was Tamara's original clipboard, the one she'd carried like a weapon. He set it on my kitchen table. Figured you earned this. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. Inside was a list of every property she'd targeted. My name was near the top, circled in red ink. Next to it, written in sharp script, "Will crack, just needs pressure." I slid the clipboard into the wood stove without a word. It burned fast. Garza didn't try to stop me. "You know," he said, watching the flames, "we could use someone like you full-time. There's more out there." I shook my head. "I already got a job," I said, nodding toward the pasture. "And the crew's not exactly easy to replace." He laughed, then left without pushing the issue. That winter was the quietest I'd ever had. No strange vehicles, no mystery finds, just the wind through the trees, the crunch of ice under boots, and the soft bleating of lambs in the shed. The fence held. The barn stayed red. And the land for the first time in a long time felt safe. That's all I ever wanted, not revenge, not headlines, just peace. And now it was mine.